The Nintendo Switch 2 is here, and it's got some pretty big shoes to fill. After all, its predecessor sold over 150 million units worldwide and popularized the idea of a hybrid console. And so, in this video, I'm going to compare the original 2017 Switch side by side to the brand new Switch 2 to see what's changed, what's improved, and if it's worth upgrading. Let's begin by comparing the design of the two systems. The original Switch tried to strike a middle ground between portability and performance. It measured 102 by 239mm with a thickness of just under 14mm. That's about the same thickness as a game case or this chocolate bar, but of course the Switch is nowhere near as delicious. With the Joy-Cons attached, it weighs just shy of 300 grams. I tried to Google some things that are the same weight and the AI told me 2 chicken breasts. So, there we have it. Overall, it was a pretty decent form factor. I mean, you couldn't fit it in your pocket, but you could just throw it in the bag. Now, the original Switch's Achilles heel was definitely the little stand. I don't actually have this 2017 Switch's stand because it's terrible and flimsy and was lost sometime in 2019. Luckily, my girlfriend lent me her newer, nicer and much cleaner Switch, which still has the stand. Also, the original Switch's SD card slot was notorious for just not reading the card after a while. As a result, I had to use this guitar capo to try and force the connectors to touch. But what about the Switch 2? Well, the first thing that jumps out at you is its size. It measures 166 by 275mm, and when you first get it out of the box and compare it against the 2017 model, it genuinely feels huge. However, it is still the same thickness as the original. The Switch 2 also weighs 401 grams, which is just over 100 grams more than the original. It definitely does feel heavier than the original, and whilst I had no issues holding it for extended periods of time while sitting down, playing it in bed did give me a bit of a cramp. Despite that, I still prefer the Switch 2's larger form factor. But what about the pocket test? Well, it does fit, technically, but good luck sitting down. Thankfully, the kickstand has also had a major redesign. It's now a stable U-shaped brace across the back, which also provides a wide range of movement and positions to stand the Switch in. Plus, it also has these little rubber bits for extra grip. When it comes down to the games, both the boxes and the game carts are the same design and size, with the Switch 2 versions being red. Also, the cartridge slot latch is a lot sturdier and has a metal cover. Plus, there is now a second USB-C port at the top. The dock has also evolved. The original was boxy and utilitarian, supporting 1080p output via HDMI and providing USB and power inputs. The new dock has a rounder, sleeker design, plus it includes an internal cooling fan. It also has support for 4K video output for select titles, plus a USB-C port along with an Ethernet port. However, the back does come off, at least my one did, which means it'll definitely get lost. Now, of course, we can't talk about the Switch's design without mentioning the Joy-Cons. Back in 2017, the Joy-Cons were definitely a novel and exciting idea. Not only did they act as regular controllers, they also split into 2 controllers for easy multiplayer on the go and incorporated motion controls. But they definitely had their flaws. Unless you were a child, the buttons were just way too small. And the same could be said about each of the individual Joy-Cons when playing in multiplayer mode. And of course, it was just a matter of time until the dreaded stick drift arrived. In addition to that, the clicking mechanism would also go after a while. Just like the console, the new Joy-Cons retain the base design but make everything bigger. From the analog sticks to the triggers, and now thankfully the face buttons too. Just saying, on the original Switch they were the same size as the DS. Nintendo have also touched up the ergonomic design of the new Joy-Cons, and whilst they're still not going to feel as good as a proper controller, they are much nicer to hold. The new Joy-Cons also attach magnetically rather than using sliding rails, and this does feel way more satisfying and intuitive than the old sliding mechanism, but I'm not sure how reliable these are going to be in the long run. But at least Nintendo have carried over the super satisfying click. And speaking of which, the analog stick clicking also feels quite a bit more robust. These new Joy-Cons also come with straps because Nintendo is still terrified of the lawsuits from the Wii era, but now we have this funky new attachment which allows for mouse-like control on flat surfaces, ideal for games like Civilization or just ironing your shirt. Overall, I think the original Switch got a lot of things right when it came to design, but many of the individual parts just weren't up to the task of surviving the intensive wear and tear that portable systems go through. Now, it is tough to say if the Switch 2 will suffer the same fate, but it looks like Nintendo at least tried to learn from the issues of the last generation. Okay, let's move on to the screen and display. The original Switch featured a 6.2 LCD screen running at 720p. It had a 60Hz refresh rate and super thick bezels. Now, personally, I never really had issues with the resolution in the handheld mode. My issue was with the glare that you'd get on the super shiny screen. It was like the worst kind of throwback to the GBA. Luckily, we only get about 6 sunny days a year in Britain, so it's not even that bad. Now, the Switch 2 still has an LCD display. However, it has grown by 27% to 7.9 inches, and has a resolution of 1080p along with a 120Hz refresh rate. There is also HDR for certain titles. Now, a lot of people have been disappointed by the lack of an OLED screen, especially considering that it was present on the Switch 1's mid-cycle refresh. Now, I'm no screen expert, but all I'll say is that games that utilize all the new features like Mario Kart World look really nice on this new display. But how does it fare outside? Well, there's still some glare, but the brighter screen makes it a lot easier to see. Oh crap, it's about to rain again. But what about the UI? The original Switch was clean, snappy, and minimal. Some would say a bit too minimal. There was no folders at launch, no real themes besides light and dark, and the home screen was just a straight line of icons. In the future, I don't think you'll ever hear anyone nostalgically reminiscing about the Switch home screen like they do about the Wii or the PSP. There just seems to be a consensus amongst everyone that it does the job, no more, no less. As for the Switch 2 UI, well, it's kind of the same. The same layout, the same options, the same menus. Sure, some of the corners have been rounded, and there are a few new features like the virtual carts, game sharing, and game chat, which now has a dedicated button on the right Joy-Con. But I'm surprised that Nintendo didn't at least try to give it a new theme to visually differentiate it from the old console. Oh well, it still does the job, I guess. Now, let's move on to the storage and performance. The original Switch came in with 32GB of internal storage and 4GB of LPDDR4 RAM. Now, when docked, the original Switch could output up to 1080p. But the custom NVIDIA Tegra X1 chip inside the original was designed for mobile devices, and it showed. It offered decent performance for first-party titles that knew how to optimize it, but it did struggle with third-party ports, especially for those from more powerful systems. This resulted in some people considering the console to be underpowered and overpriced. But like many Nintendo consoles of the past, the Switch's strong first-party library helped it get past its hardware limitations. Now, being released 8 years later, the Switch 2 naturally has improved storage and horsepower. There is now 256GB of internal storage, 12GB of LPDDR5 RAM, and it uses NVIDIA's custom T239 Ampere-based chipset, which offers up to 10 times graphics power, whatever that means. Geez, it was so much easier when manufacturers just threw bits at us. This does mean that the Switch 2 supports ray tracing and DLSS for select software. Finally, Mario in 4K. He's beautiful, just look at that next generation ass. Oh dear God, no. And whilst the Switch 2 is a ways behind the current generation of home consoles, it's definitely a noticeable jump up from the original. As I mentioned earlier, Mario Kart World looks great in handheld mode, and it still looks great on a medium-sized TV. But if you're going to plug this into your 80-inch home cinema, then yes, it's technically going to output to 4K, but the character models and textures will look a little rough around the edges. In the meantime, here is a quick comparison of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe to Mario Kart World. Do you think there's enough of a generational leap here? Okay, but what about the battery life that's needed to play all of these games on the go? Well, the playtime on the original Switch's 4310 mAh battery varied widely. For the launch units, Nintendo quoted anything between 2.5 to 6.5 depending on what you were doing, and this would improve to 4.5 to 9 hours with the 2019 model. Now, I can't really run a comparison between my original Switch and the Switch 2's battery because the lithium inside the 2017 model has very much depleted. After 8 years of ownership and play, this original battery will last around about an hour for most games on half brightness. Now, the Switch 2 includes a 5220 mAh battery, which is 900 more than the original, but its power-hungry internals very much eat away at the battery life. Officially, Nintendo estimates anywhere from 2 to 6.5 hours of play, depending on the game, which is pretty much in line with my first couple of days of playing it. So the Switch 2 definitely has a trade-off between performance and portability, and whether you think that's the right move will really depend on your personal use case. All I can say is you better have a power bank ready. Okay, now let's talk about the launch games, because what's the point of getting a brand new console if there's only 2 games to play on it? Right, Nintendo 64? Now, the original Switch wasn't quite that bad. In the West, it launched with 5 major titles, but out of those, Breath of the Wild was very much the system seller. Now, on paper, the Switch 2 arrives with a much bigger lineup of 25 games at launch, but there are a few asterisks we need to point out. Of those 25, 6 are enhanced Switch 2 editions of existing Switch games, 7 are ports of older games, plus there are also a bunch of smaller online store-only games. And once you apply all those caveats, the only sizable, notable, new, exclusive Switch 2 launch game is Mario Kart World. And that game is great. In fact, I am going to be comparing it to all the other Mario Kart games very soon, so keep an eye out for that video. But what that means for the Switch 2 is that it's very much continuing Nintendo's tradition of launching new hardware with a single big first-party title. And speaking of history, let's talk about the backwards compatibility. The original Switch didn't support any physical media from previous Nintendo systems. Yes, it would get access to emulated versions of many older games via its Nintendo Classic service, but that didn't launch until 2018. Thankfully, the Switch 2 offers backwards compatibility across most of its predecessor's library. Currently, the vast majority of first-party titles and about 70% of third-party titles work with no issues, and developers are currently in the process of patching the games that do have issues. However, some games like Nintendo Labo are incompatible due to new hardware dimensions and missing IR functionality on the Switch 2. Likewise, games that require old Joy-Cons like 1-2 Switch, WarioWare Move It, and Game Builder Garage will still work, but they need you to connect the old Joy-Cons.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Now, to test the backwards compatibility, I'm going to compare some footage from Breath of the Wild. I've got the original game running on the original Switch, the original game running on Switch 2, and the enhanced Switch 2 edition running on Switch 2. Now, you're probably watching this on your phone, so there's not really much of a point in doing a docked comparison. So, all the footage I'm going to be showing is actually going to be running in handheld mode. Let me know if you can tell the difference. And so there we have it, the original 2017 Switch compared to the 2025 Switch 2. So what's the verdict? Well, I like the chunkier, more refined design, and the hardware upgrades are welcome if a bit overdue. But I'll be honest, right now the Switch 2 feels more like an upgraded Switch 1 than a step into a new generation. The user interface is identical, it plays many of the same games, it's just a bit bigger and better at doing all the same things the original Switch did. But to be honest, that's usually been the launch launch day experience for the last few generations. Gone are the days of gigantic leaps in graphics that we remember growing up. I'm confident that Nintendo will build a strong first-party library for the Switch 2, and it has every opportunity to attract a solid third-party lineup, especially by continuing the trend of bringing slightly older or last-gen titles to portable hardware. Because if we've learned anything from the past, it's that the games make the hardware. But that's just my take. Please let me know your thoughts on the Switch 2 in the comments below. What do you like? What do you dislike? And will you be getting the console now or in the future? As always, thanks for watching. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and a big thanks to my existing patrons. If you've enjoyed this video, then please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.